Hi, everyone. This is S.J. Thomason with Christian-Apologist.com, and I am here with Dr. Hugh Ross, who is the author of a number of different books. He has a PhD from the University of Toronto, and he's an astronomer, and he's also the founder and president of an organization entitled Reasons to Believe, where he integrates science with faith. And I just want to point out that I've read a bunch of his books, so I just want to mention, everyone go buy these. There's Improbable Planet, Why the Universe is the Way It Is, Always Be Ready to Give Reasons for Your Faith, Navigating Genesis, Lights in the Sky and Little Green Men, The Creator and the Cosmos. And today we're going to specially focus on weathering climate change. This is an issue that's obviously impacting the world. It's super important. A lot of people are actually thinking it's more important than even COVID. And so we're going to talk about that. But before we go to Dr. Ross, I wanted to introduce also Rowe. He is the founder and president of Sentinel Apologetics. He's got quite a good force. And he and I are both going to be interviewing Dr. Ross together. So without further ado, let me go ahead and first say hi to Rob. Rob, if you want to introduce yourself, and then we'll go to Dr. Ross.
No worries. Thanks, SJ. Yeah, I really appreciate this. Hugh Ross's ministry has been a huge beneficial help for my journey in the faith. I remember meeting Hugh in Perth, Australia, 2014. That was my venturing into Christianity in those 3 years since 2010, moving up into 2014. I remember him at University of Western Australia giving his talk on, I think you were talking mostly on why the universe is the way it is. Right. And then the whole RTB chapter in the city, and just getting involved with that, and huge long journey as far as that's concerned, but a huge help. And I've always endorsed your work, Dr. Ross. So it's really good.
Yeah, well, thank you. So tell us about your latest book.
Well, it is Weathering Climate Change, and I was motivated to write the book because I see this political divide where people are thinking, hey, the climate's getting warmer, and the only way we're going to be able to deal with it is to make very significant economic sacrifices. But I saw that as violating a principle of humanity. We're fundamentally selfish. If the government tells us that we need to live on half of our normal income, we're probably not going to do it. And so what we need to do is find ways to sustain climate stability while we boost the world economy rather than cripple the world economy. But the main feature of the book is all the fine-tuning that's needed to open up this 10,000-year period of extreme climate stability, basically making a point that this climate stability we've been enjoying for thousands of years, it's the exception. The norm is climate instability.
Yeah. I love that chart. I had that marked. Rob showed me that in another talk that we had, and that was why I bought the book. This chart. I'm absolutely fascinated by this. Can you
show you why, for example, humans living during the last ice age were not able to launch civilization? The climate was radically unstable, temperature jumping up and down by 10 to 12 degrees centigrade on timescales a few centuries. So they were just as intellectually motivated as we were. They were inventive, but the climate was so extremely unstable, they simply weren't able to set enough percentage of the population free to focus on technology and science and engineering. 99% of the population basically was trying to come up with enough food. But with climate stability, all that changed.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. I'm going to go to Rob. Rob, you want to just kind of go back and forth?
So Hugh, I reckon this book, and I know you've designed this book as to approach this topic, and I think what fascinated me was your usage of papers, even as late as last year. Like, I was following the footnotes, some were dated like early of 2019. I'm thinking, wow, and now the book was only just published this year. So I find an interesting build-up. I don't know if you were doing this intentionally, but for example, Navigating Genesis, you were giving hints of, in this case, human anthropology, like they're going into the Persian Gulf, and you're sort of like giving hints as to the bottlenecking of certain, where humans are bottlenecked due to weather problems and so on. And then, as I think it was last year, the young Dryas impact that was confirmed, and then the implications of, oh yeah, like say 9,500 years is this stability that's taking place. So, and plus because I've been reading a lot of your books, and plus in your Hidden Treasures of the Book of Job, you give solutions, right? The deserts, and then also what type of food we should be eating, and so in other words, precipitation levels is the wisdom that Job gives off for us to focus on if you're going to try and do something. So I'm noticing this build up, and then now I consider this book as part of the RTB model. So I just want to start there. Would you agree with me on that observation?
Yes, I would. I mean, I purposely waited to bring the book out until we had really reliable temperature records for the past 10,000 years, actually the past 20,000, because there was a big debate 3 years ago. Is global warming real? That debate is now done because we have really good temperature records, and actually reveals that the climate is 3 times more stable than what we thought 3 years ago. The global mean temperature is not changed by more than plus or minus 0.65 degrees for the past 9,500 years. But the enigma is that we're living in an ice age cycle. And the ice age cycle is characterized by about 90,000 years of more than 20% of the planet covered with thousands of feet of ice. And then you get a warm interglacial where only 10% is covered. But what happens is you get this rapid temperature rise coming out of the ice age, where the temperature quickly jumps up to about 2 degrees centigrade above where we are right now. Then it rapidly drops us back down into an ice age. You mentioned the Younger Dryas cooling event. That has only happened once in the entire ice age cycle, when the global mean temperature is rapidly rising, and then suddenly it stopped. It dropped by 10 degrees centigrade, and that prevented the global mean temperature from rising up to its normal maximum. And what happened is it briefly stabilized the climate, and when it did, humans launched civilization. That began about 11,000 years ago. And but starting 11,000 years ago, the natural cycles that were warming the planet now began to cool the planet. And so for the last 9,000 years, we've been undergoing natural cooling, mainly as a result of variations in Earth's orbit about the sun and variations in the tilt of our rotation axis. But what has counterbalanced the natural cooling is the warming from the launch of human civilization. And to me, the miracle is the natural cooling cycles have been perfectly counterbalanced by the growth of human civilization. And they've been in balance for 9,500 years. The only time it's gotten out of balance is the last 70 years. Because what's happened since the close of World War II is that human civilization technology has exponentially accelerated. And it's that exponential acceleration that is now warming the planet as a result of human activity more rapidly than the natural cycles are cooling it. And you say, well, what's going to happen? If we continue on our current trend, the global mean temperature will jump up by 2 degrees centigrade. And what's new in the book is we give the reason why global warming always brings on global cooling. Because global warming by another 2 degrees centigrade will melt the polar ice cap. And when you melt the polar ice cap, instead of sunlight being reflected with 60% efficiency off of the Arctic Ocean, it will only be reflected with 6% efficiency. And all that extra solar heat produces water vapor over the Arctic, which will fall as snow over Siberia and Canada. The only reason Canada and Siberia are not covered with thousands of feet of ice today is that they don't get enough moisture. But if you double the precipitation or triple it, quickly Siberia and Canada become covered with thousands of feet of ice, and that cools the whole planet. And we spend the next 90,000 years in an ice age.
Wow. So people really need to act on this. I mean, we can't just ignore this. And I think that was one of the alarming things in your book. Number one, I thought it was counterintuitive because we always talk about global warming and you're pointing out what's actually going to happen, how it would cool us off. I thought that was super interesting. But people, you were making some specific suggestions on what people can do to help the situation out. Would you want to share any of those?
Sure. I mean, number one, we have the biblical principle that we human beings are fundamentally selfish. So any solution that requires draconian economic sacrifices simply will not be able to be enforced. People will cheat. But another biblical principle is a command we see in Genesis 1 and the book of Job, where God basically charges humanity with the responsibility of managing planet Earth's resources. And he's commanded us we're to manage it for our benefit and the benefit of all their life, which means we're not going to be between a rock and a hard place. There will be solutions where we can sustain climate stability, where it produces an economic benefit for us, and it produces a benefit of improving the ecosystems for all the life on planet Earth. And so I've got 2 chapters in the book that I load up with what I call win-win-win solutions. It's good for the economy, it's good for the ecosystems, and it's actually good for human health, and it especially benefits the poorest people of the world. And that's why I say my motivation was to take the politics out of this debate. If you can come up with solutions where everybody wins and nobody loses, who's going to vote against it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. Rob?
So yeah, and also just on what you just said a moment ago in regards to this buffering, that I was immediately sort of it was like that epiphany moment while I'm reading. I was only up to like page 38, just before chapter 3, warming projections, and I was looking at the GWP. The whole turn 70 parts per million to a 2018 level of 410 parts per million, like the carbon dioxide rise. And yeah, I was already seeing, oh my goodness, that is a very fascinating fine-tuning argument in a very localized sense as well, right? Because you're having this fluctuation. We know with human migration and all that, like it's sporadic. I mean, looking back to your Navigating Genesis book, where humans are localized, right? You
can see that.
Then civilization starts due to that stability. And now, yes, what you're suggesting is, because don't forget, in Probable Planet, you said, using Revelation 7 as the time will come when there's going to be like 7 or 8 billion people simultaneously on this planet. And John, when he has this perspective of this vast multitude in heaven, well, in his day, no one would have imagined 7 billion people simultaneously living on this planet. But it's interesting how that foresight, it's like, yeah, I'm going to do this to in this case, God, right? I'm going to do this to the planet to have that threshold and buffering that's going to happen well in the future. But at the time when there's 7 or 8 billion people living on the planet, it wouldn't have been like a mere 1 million people. I mean, I could be conjecturing on this, but a mere 1 million people population would not do that much of an impact compared to like what, say in the last 20 years, right? Am I on the right track with this?
Yeah, you definitely are on the right track with that. And what amazes me in writing the book is that we've got this 10,000-year window of extreme climate stability, thanks to the perfect balance between human activity and the natural cooling cycles, but that simultaneously overlaps a narrow time window when the sun is more stable than it's ever been in its history and ever will be in its future, which simultaneously overlaps another very narrow time window where we don't have any nearby supernova eruptions. And that's just 3. I talk about a dozen narrow time windows, 10,000 to 50,000 years wide, and they're all independent of one another, but fortuitously, they simultaneously overlap in such a way that we can have billions of people thriving on planet Earth. And you quoted Revelation chapter 7. That's where God tells John 2,000 years ago, the number of humans that will be part of the redemptive host is going to be an uncountable number. So it was God's plan all along that billions of us would be able to live on this planet at one time with the civilization and technology, that we can take the good news of salvation to all the people groups of the world, not in millions of years, but just in decades. And so we're living at that time.
And just quickly, Esther, so that's brilliant. A brilliant lead up to the very good. I mean, I'm saying this just to be the skeptic here, or the non-Christian here. That leads up to the claim that you make, and I've seen this in a Facebook post of yours. But then you've made it more like you've actually given the scientific meat in this book. That the timing of all that has now led to the moment where we only have between 100 and 1,500 years to, as far as what, the survivability of humans, or maybe explain that.
The point I'm making is that there are ways that are economically beneficial to us that we can continue this extreme climate stability.
Right.
But there's a limit. And I'm arguing that at best we can put it off maybe 1,400, 1,500 years. But inevitably, an ice age is coming. Mm-hmm. And when it comes, it's going to bring extreme climate instability. So my point is, we got 1,400 to 1,500 years to fulfill the purpose for why we human beings currently exist in the universe. And so, I mean, if we ignore the problem of global warming, we could be seeing an ice age happening rather quickly. And I can tell you what the two signs are. If you begin to see an accumulation of ice and snow in both Western Siberia and in Labrador, then you know that an ice age is imminent. And right now we're not seeing that. But that's been the sign in previous ice ages. So and therefore I'm arguing we need to do what we can to prevent the melting of the polar ice cap. And I'm also arguing if we provide people with an economic incentive, we can solve this problem quickly. If you try to solve the problem with economic sacrifices, people will drag their feet and it's going to be too late.
Right. Yeah, one of the things that you mentioned in the book is you were talking about specific foods that people should and maybe shouldn't eat. And did you were talking about, I think if I recall it correctly, ostrich and versus say meat, the beef. I wanted to see if you wanted to mention a good diet for the globe.
Well, you asked an example where you make more money, you got a healthier diet, it tastes better, and you basically stop a lot of greenhouse gases from going in the atmosphere. I mean, a lot of people have talked about the cow catastrophe we're facing. You know, we have these hundreds of millions of cows, and they're belching lots of methane and carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And if we could somehow do without our extreme dependence on cows, we'd be better off. And most of the cows that we breed are for meat, not for milk, but for meat. And so therefore I suggest, well, there's another source of red meat. People like red meat. Ostrich meat is red meat. In my opinion, it tastes better than beef. It's far healthier than beef. It's very low cholesterol, very low saturated fat. It's the healthiest meat that you can consume. And if we were to transfer dependence from beef to ostrich meat, you'd be releasing only 2% of the greenhouse gases that the cows release. And so that would be a huge way, a huge benefit to stabilizing the climate. And moreover, the meat, if you scale it up, would be the cheapest meat in the market. Right now, the cheapest meat you can buy is turkey meat. But this potentially has the possibility of being available to us for half the price of turkey. And so now you've got a cheap source of meat. It's the healthiest meat on the market. It tastes great. And look at all the greenhouse gases you prevent from going into the atmosphere. There is one downside, however, and there's a reason why a lot of ostrich ranches have failed. You cannot treat ostriches like you treat cows. They're highly social animals. You cannot just let them go loose by themselves in a big field. They need social contact with one another, and especially with human beings. So if you treat them like your pets, your ostrich ranch is going to do really well. If you treat them like your cows, your ostrich ranch will probably fail.
Oh, wow. This is very interesting. And I wanted to ask you, I know you're in California and I know Rob is in Australia. Where do you get ostrich? Because I don't think I've seen it in the stores.
Well, there are a lot of successful ostrich ranches in Africa. There they know how to handle the ostriches. There are a few ostrich ranches that are successful here in the U.S., but currently they're not producing enough meat to satisfy the market. And so if you're a diabetic, you can get a prescription for ostrich meat because of its health benefits, but it's not cheap. So it needs to be scaled up to drop the price down. And incidentally, with ostriches, you also get eggs. I mean, one ostrich egg is equivalent to 22 chicken eggs. So that's another economic benefit we get from ostriches.
Wow. I'll turn it over to Rob.
So what are the ramifications if say worst case scenario? The warnings that you provide in this book, if an ice age does happen relatively soon, what happens to us?
What happens to
a model? Yeah.
The climate becomes very unstable. The carbon dioxide level will drop, and people think that might be a good thing because it's high right now. But typically, when you're in an ice age, it drops below the level it was before the Industrial Revolution. And when that happens, it limits your crop potential. You're not going to be able to grow as much food. And with the climate instability, again, you're going to be forced back on having small farms where you have mixed farming. So we're going to have a lot less food production, which means we'll no longer be able to sustain billions of human beings. And again, a majority of the human population will have to focus on food production. So those of us who are working as engineers and scientists, we're going to have to go out in the fields and get food. And of course, that's going to really limit the growth of technology and the sustaining of civilization. I mean, basically, we're going to go back to where we were 15,000 years ago. People were planting fields, they were making bread, they were involved in metallurgy, but it was all on a very small scale. And you need climate stability to be able to scale up. And I'm a Canadian, so I'm not going to be able to go back to Canada because all of Canada is going to be covered with thousands of feet of ice. And hey, you're there in Australia. During the last ice age, all of Tasmania was covered over with ice. So the Tasmanians are going to have to move. And it wasn't just Tasmania, there was parts of southern Australia that are also impacted by the last ice age. So yeah, it's going to be catastrophic for human civilization.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I love the movie Interstellar, Matthew McConaughey, and what we see in the movie. Are you suggesting, anyone in the outside audience, basically, who may not understand the implications of this, but since there's a movie in that Hollywood has produced, but I think is relatively accurate as far as the scientific details go, even the black hole stuff. But what they depict as exactly what you just said, everyone's needing to drop all the specialized fields. They go straight into just agriculture stuff. But the movie does get into the whole where humans will begin to asphyxiate. They won't be able to breathe properly. Is that accurate, or will that ever happen as the movie depicts it, or no?
Yeah, I mean, eventually, because the sun is continuing to get brighter and brighter, so we're looking millions of years into the future, the sun will brighten to a point where, in order to compensate for the brightening so that we humans can exist here, we're going to need to significantly drop the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. The problem with that is photosynthetic life needs carbon dioxide. So if you drop the carbon dioxide level down to, say, 150 parts per million, which almost happened during the last ice age, photosynthesis stops. And when photosynthesis stops, there goes your food supply. So that was kind of the theme of that movie and other movies where people say, well, maybe we need to find another planet. But I just posted a blog today at
to that as far as finding another planet, because people are into this, because you watch movies, we watch all of those movies where people are traveling around in space, like Star Trek and Star Wars and all of that. We couldn't physically get to another planet that could have these habitable zones that we have. I wanted to see if you wanted to.
Well, I've actually got a blog up on our reasons.org website, is that even Mars is out of the question. The reason why is that once you get outside of Earth's magnetosphere, you get exposed to fast-moving, heavy nuclei cosmic rays. And they did experiments on mice. And the reason they chose mice, their digestive tract is an excellent proxy for the human digestive tract. Notice they eat the same foods we eat. And what they discovered is, in just 3 months, the digestive tracts of those mice were destroyed by the radiation that they were exposed to. So yeah, we could send astronauts onto Mars, but 3 months into the trip, their digestive tracts would be so messed up, they wouldn't be able to function. And within 6 to 7 months, they would be dead. And you say, well, can't we just have an artificial magnetosphere around the spaceship? That's actually technologically infeasible. We now realize that to make a magnetosphere that big and strong enough and stable enough to protect human beings, you're going to need gravity to stabilize the magnetosphere. So you're basically going to need a spaceship about the size of Earth in order to have a magnetosphere that can provide you with the protection. You say, well, we've been able to go to the moon. Yeah, but when you go to the moon, you can go at a time when Earth's magnetosphere protects you for a significant fraction of the trip. And we also know if you're only exposed to 1 week's worth of radiation, you'll survive. It's being exposed to several months that is catastrophic. So yeah, we're basically stuck here. And yeah, we could put a colony on the moon, but you don't want to spend a long time on the moon. A week is about what you want to spend. You want to get back under the protection of Earth's magnetosphere.
Yeah, I did come across an MIT paper. This is back, I think, 2015 or something, or even maybe 2016. But an MIT, they could be wrong on this, but it was bizarre. It was a study saying that 6 months down the track. Wait, how long does it take to say from Earth to Mars?
The fastest you can get there with current technology is 6 months, and
yeah,
the gravitational assist. Coming back, it's going to be 3.5 years.
Right. So I think the paper is saying something like 3 months into the mission, the spacecraft will explode, literally a fireball, because apparently there's a leaking of nitrogen. I don't know. I could be getting the paper wrong, but there's an accumulation of oxygen on the spacecraft, and then boom. And there seems to be a paradox in maintaining the atmosphere.
Yeah, I saw that paper. It's a risk, but there is an engineering fix for that.
Okay.
The problem with the magnetosphere, I mean, for example, we could actually have the spacecraft spinning so you get artificial gravity. Because, yeah, you want artificial gravity. We don't do well in zero gravity. But the big problem is getting protection from those nasty cosmic rays. And there is no foreseeable technological fix for that, other than building a really enormous spaceship.
So, coming back to climate change, there are, like, in chapter 1 of this book, you get into the climate deniers, really, that this whole thing is a myth. So maybe your top 3 or even your top 5 very blunt sort of bullet point facts that, no, this is legit, don't be a denier of it.
Well, where I am sympathetic to the global warming deniers is that too much focus has been put on carbon dioxide.
Right.
It is one warming factor, but what you notice in the early chapters of the book, I talk about all the natural features and human activities that are causing our planet to warm up. Carbon dioxide is a significant factor, but you also need to look at methane, you need to look at nitrous oxides, hydrochlorocarbons, and one that I think has really been ignored, the deposition of black carbon soot. because the enigma is, why is Canada warming up 5 times faster than the rest of the world? Well, we now know Canada is getting an exceptional load of black carbon soot from India and China. And you put that black carbon soot on snow, it melts the snow, and it warms the temperature up. So I have a chapter in the book on unintended consequences.
Yeah.
I mean, all we do is we focus on one factor that's warming the planet. We could discover we're solving that problem, but we're making all the other problems worse.
Yeah.
And so we really do need an integrated approach to dealing with climate change. And we need to use an approach that provides people with a strong economic incentive. I mean, what I hear from my economist friends, if you can provide the public with an economic solution where they make more than 8% per year in their investment, you don't have to pass a law. They'll do it. They're not stupid. They're going to say, hey, this is going to make me wealthier. This is a no-brainer. I'm going to go for it. And so I basically load the book up with those kinds of no-brainers. And one thing I appreciate about our editorial team at Reasons to Believe, they asked me to provide a link to every scientific research paper I cite. And so people reading the book can immediately go to all the papers I cite and see for themselves the validity of the claims that I make.
Right.
Yeah, in case people don't realize, just if you're just joining us now, we're talking about weathering climate change. It's by Dr. Ross. He has a PhD in astronomy. He's from the University of Toronto, very educated, and you can tell that the level and the quality of the research that he's done in all of his books has been top notch. And so I just wanted to highlight that for newcomers here who might not be familiar with you. So we really do need to do something about climate change. I don't think we can look the other way. And do you see this? And you mentioned before about the political issues going on right now. We have a big election here in the United States tomorrow, as everyone knows. Is there a way to sell to people who are, say, flat? I'm guessing not flat earthers, but who want to know if the Bible is also integrated into this whole thing? Did the Bible give us any hints of this sort of thing?
Well, the Bible did, in the sense that it tells us we're to manage the planet for our benefit and the benefit of all life. The book of Job, for example, is loaded with a chapter and a half on how extraordinarily fine-tuned our water cycle is to provide us with a supply of water all over the planet. I mean, to me, what's amazing is our planet is designed in such a way that the mountains tend to be highest towards the equator and not so high at high latitudes. And what that does is it globally distributes the ice on the planet. I mean, right at the equator, you got Mount Chimborazo. It's got 6 massive glaciers on it. And the melting of that ice is feeding the Amazon River system. And so wherever you go on planet Earth, there are sources of melting ice. And likewise with our precipitation, hail falls all over the planet. And that provides you. And the property of ice, it slowly melts. If you get rain, the rain flows and it goes into the ocean. But with ice, it slowly melts, which means you can get a steady supply of liquid water, which is what you need to grow a huge quantity of food. So we're basically living off the benefit of ice left over from the last ice age. Ice left over from the last ice age is feeding the great rivers that water the agricultural plains of the earth. Another huge benefit we get from living in an ice age cycle is every time the ice rapidly melts from an ice age, it causes volcanic eruptions all over the world. And those volcanic eruptions deposit nutrient-rich ash and dust over the great agricultural plains. So with the ice age cycle, every 100,000 years, you get a fertilization event. And then with that water, the combination of the fertilizer and the steady water flow is why we can grow enough food to feed billions of human beings.
It's absolutely fascinating.
And this, I mean, that's another thing I couldn't believe when I was reading this, because, in your discussion question on page 71, you pretty much bring it out, because you discuss this in the chapter. How does the geographical distribution of Earth's 300 highest mountains benefit the planet's life? And it's just, again, when I was reading this, I was just thinking, hang on a second. we don't even ask that question when we are looking at, when we are just observing the beauty, right? Like here in Australia, we have carved out canyons and so on, and we just, obviously we have one of the oldest rocks here in the world, right? 4.4 billion years is the dating. So all the tourists here, we just bask in the beauty of just this, what we call the outback and desert-like conditions, and yeah, we don't even think, hang on, this has a connection to not just life, but also, climate, weathering, stability, and so on. And yeah, in other words, it was a very humbling thing to read that, because we do take things for granted. That's the realization I was getting at. And in this sense, being a Christian, again, basically everything is deliberate. There's no wasted, like if God is, the creator of all this, it is an audacious thing to tell a non-Christian or a non-believer, but literally every atom in this sense is deliberately put there for a specific purpose. And in this case, you're talking as something as simple as just, mountains. But yeah, even they play a role in all that, right? Yeah.
Yeah, we're living on a planet that's got long mountain chains. And I just finished another book, won't be out for another year, about how rare it is to have a planet with long mountain chains, but you need that to have advanced life. And the thing that really blew me away in writing the book, Weathering Climate Change, is recognizing we live in the scenically most beautiful time in the history of the Earth. It's thanks to the fact that we're in a warm interglacial after the most severe ice age in the ice age cycle. We have all this spectacular scenery, not only in Australia, but all over the world. I mean, I live in Southern California. The last ice age had thousands of feet of ice penetrating all the way into Southern California. And what did it leave behind? It left behind Yosemite Valley, this gorgeous canyon where you got waterfalls flowing over, granite sheer walls that are thousands of feet high. And, North America takes the biggest hit in the ice age cycle. 55% of North America was covered by thousands of feet of ice in the last ice age, but explains why North America has got 2/3 of the world's lakes, why it has these incredibly beautiful canyons. I mean, I think God knew ahead of time that when there's billions of us living in dense metropolitan cities, we're going to need to have some spiritual refreshment on the natural beauty that he made possible, thanks to us living in this ice age. And, particularly in the 21st century, when we're facing all this technological stress. And something else I've noticed as a Christian, how much easier it is to share my Christian faith with atheist scientists when I take them into a natural, wild, beautiful environment than it is in the hallways of Caltech.
Yeah. And that's the thing. Everyone go to Hugh Ross's Facebook, because I think a week ago or 2 weeks ago, you actually put a photo of you standing at an edge saying there was once upon a time and all the, this is just completely covered with ice. And now, all that ice has been removed and you see this beauty and yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a canyon with 13 huge waterfalls flowing over 2,000 foot high granite walls. And when you're in that valley, it's just carpeted with wild strawberries and raspberries and blueberries and wildlife. I mean, it was just a gorgeous experience.
Right.
Yeah, that's one thing that I think that the general revelation of God is a very powerful argument. Just looking at nature, I know that atheists don't like when I say this. When I say go look at the trees, honestly, I really like that. Jesse Camping wants to know. He says, is the climate timeline compared to the out of Africa hypothesis up to the settlement of mankind in his book also?
Well, I do talk about humans living during the last ice age. I mean, the dates we have for the origin of humanity they're not direct dating methods. So we need to realize they got huge error bars. So we don't have a firm date. From a biblical perspective, Genesis 2 implies that Adam and Eve were created sometime during the last ice age. But hey, that's a range of 15,000 to 130,000 years ago. We do have very good genetic evidence that humanity began in one locale and then quickly spread to inhabit the whole world. We can date that to about 40 to 45,000 years ago. That's when the really aggressive migration of humanity into all the continents of the world took place. I do mention in the book that to have billions of human beings, you need the continents and the islands well separated from one another. And we're living at that time in the supercontinent cycle, when the supercontinent broke up into these 7 continents. But for the first time in the history of the Earth, we have these well-separated continents and islands, but it's relatively easy to go from one to the other because there are points where the continents are actually very close to one another. For example, Asia's proximity to North America and the Bering Strait. And, like Rob will tell you about Australia, it wasn't that difficult during the last ice age to island hop from Asia into Australia. It's challenging now because the sea levels are much higher. But during the last ice age, the sea levels were 350 feet lower than they are right now.
That's fascinating.
I'm going to use this opportunity to let you know that I've interviewed Jeffrey Rose the second time around. Like Jeff Rose, who the Persian Gulf thing, he wrote that 2010 paper.
Mm-hmm.
So I interviewed him 2 months ago, maybe, or 3 months ago. Actually, just before the whole COVID thing, the lockdown stuff. And he's going to be releasing a book, a Springer publication at the end of this year, about what he wrote back in 2010 about that Persian Gulf stuff. His contention is that based on all these, and I found it fascinating because I had the draft of that book. And now that I've been reading this, he's also coming with very similar dates as far as that 9,500 years ago, that bang, that stability happening. He thinks that the flood, which is that Persian Gulf stuff, was a massive cyclone, unheard of, because the Bible and in ancient Near Eastern myth, the Bible mentions, like a strong wind went to, move the water. Obviously, the Bible says, it's just raining, right? A lot of inundation of water here and there. But it's interesting, the Bible has wind, and the ancient Near Eastern myths, which is coming from that same region, speak about like a wind. In fact, they made this particular wind like a demon, like because it was so horrific. I don't know, would you say something significant like that happened as far as like wind patterns, and like a cyclone actually was the case for the flooding rather than just water?
Well, right now you got the Indian monsoons, where you get these seasons where you get these huge depositions of rainfall on the Indian subcontinent. I think what you're referring to is a change in that cyclone cycle, where instead of all the water being dumped on India, it gets dumped on Arabia and the Persian Gulf region.
And that's what he said.
Written in Navigating Genesis is it really to explain the quantity of water that's necessary. You're going to need several sources of water. And so I argue that the flood has to be an ice age event, because you're going to need a lot of melting water from ice in the surrounding regions to explain why the flood lasted 13 and a half months. It's not going to last 13 and a half months if the water is all coming in from the ocean or from liquid water. The text also talks about water coming up from below the ground, and underneath the Persian Gulf, there's an enormous aquifer. So if you had a tectonic event, massive earthquakes that brought up all this water from below, you got the cyclones. One geologist I know is convinced that there's a berm at the Gulf of Hormuz, and that berm, undersea berm, broke, and therefore allowed a massive rush of Indian Ocean water into that whole region. And we're talking during the last ice age, we're talking at a time when the sea levels are as much as 390 feet lower. And so the fact that we see evidence for an undersea burn there, that could have completely blocked the Gulf of Hormuz at that time. So that's actually in the next book I'm going to be working on, is a full-length book on the flood. But it's similar to this climate change book where I'm saying There are multiple factors, and we need to integrate these multiple factors to get an accurate picture of what was really going on. But, referring to what Stephanie was talking about, we do have not only biblical evidence, but strong scientific evidence that humanity began in one locale and then in a short period of time quickly spread out to all the places of the world. The genetic evidence screams that took place, and you see that in Genesis chapter 10, that there was this period when God scattered humanity over all the places of the world. The context says God commanded both Adam and Noah, multiply and fill the earth, and neither of them did so. And so God says, well, this is a serious situation, and he basically scattered humanity over the face of the earth. And it's the only period in human history where you see this extremely aggressive migration and colonization. The DNA evidence even tells us what the migration routes were. Basically along the southern shore of Asia, into Australia, and along the western shore of North and South America. And that makes sense because those are the easiest migration routes. And there's a big debate going on, did humanity begin in East Africa or in the Persian Gulf? And I've argued in my book, Navigating Genesis, there are 3 times during the last ice age where you got a very easy migration route between East Africa and the Persian Gulf. There was a land bridge between Arabia and Africa, and you've got a riverbed that is now dry, but would have been flowing at that time. It would have been very easy for humans to migrate back and forth between East Africa and the Persian Gulf.
And everything you just said, believe it or not, if you can watch the interview, because this is Jeff Rose as an anthropologist in that region. I was going, wow, this is quite. I mean, the fact that he's going to be publishing this, right?
Right.
Yeah, it's just fascinating that the overlap between you and him, and both of you coming from totally different fields of expertise, but basically the data points are I think 80% overlap. Yeah.
Well, that's good to hear.
Yeah.
Oh, that's really interesting. Now, just because of climate change, one of the things people talk about a lot is sea level rise, but there's a little bit more that could be going on here with maybe more hurricanes or more cyclones or more wildfires in California where you are. How does climate change relate to some of those sorts of things?
Well, the sea level is rising, but not quickly. I mean, it's not like you're going to be having all of the Netherlands inundated in the next 10 years. It takes time for the ice to melt and bring up but I mean, it's certainly within the realm of possibility. We could see a rise of 10 meters within just centuries. So that's certainly within 1,000 years, that's possible. But there's ways to mitigate that. I mean, you can build dams, you can build protective features. If we stabilize the climate, that will stop the melting of the ice. And so I think we can handle 1 millimeter a year. The question is, what if it gets to be meters? So as far as the wildfires go, I do think that the wildfires here in Western North America can be partly blamed on global warming, but I think a much bigger factor is forest mismanagement. I mean, the fires here in the West, there's a natural burn rate. Where I live in Southern California, long before humans were here, the forests and the brushlands here would burn off an average of once every 8 years. But now that we got millions of humans living here, you don't want those fires happening that frequently, so we suppress the fires. But then when we get a fire, so I mean, there's a region where I live where it hasn't burned off in 25 years. And this year it burned. And it was a huge fire as a result because of the enormous amount of fuel that was there. And that's not good for the ecosystem. So we need to restore things back to the natural burn rate and realize, for example, we all treasure the sequoias and the redwoods here in California. They cannot survive without wildfires. They need wildfires. I mean, they're very well adapted to forest fires. And they play a crucial role in the ecosystem. If it wasn't for redwoods, you'd have less than half the moisture in the soil, because those redwoods are so tall, they capture the fog coming in off the ocean, and actually that moisture gets brought down to the soil, supports the whole ecosystem. So again, this is another example where I actually argue it'd be to our advantage to open up our national forests and even our national parks to lumbering companies, have them go in and selectively cut down the big old trees that are in danger of dying. If you let them die, they'll decay and release greenhouse gases to the atmosphere. And those big old trees are where you're going to make the most money. And there you're going to be sequestering the wood as furniture in homes. Then you replant with younger trees. Younger trees grow 2 to 4 times faster than the old trees. That's going to pull a lot more greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And if you don't have so much dead wood in the forest, the animals are going to be able to navigate more easily. And so you actually improve the ecosystem. And if you actually thin the trees out a little bit, the bark beetles won't get a hold of them. And the tourists are going to love that, because now when they go to the parks, instead of seeing half the trees dead, they're going to see a really beautiful looking forest.
So
Another
this
example where everybody wins.
all of this sounds like just like how God's like, Adam, get to work, till the ground, be busy, so what you're saying is, notice this is that Christian attitude, like to look after this, do that Adam mandate, right? If we don't do that, then it's nothing but being lazy, and I this may sound judgmental, but not maintaining what you are, and that is an imager of God. This sounds a bit judgmental for people out there. If you're an imager of God and you're seeing the ethical implications as you see it through the Bible and so on, then sure enough you would want to do exactly what you're saying. I may be sounding a bit harsh in that sense, but I don't want to. It's just I'm making those connections because Genesis 2 says, Adam, get to work, be busy. And literally the word is, you're a slave. Evet is used there in Genesis 2. It just means servant, like he's working the ground. And if we don't do that, then it's like you're not imaging what you're meant to be. It's not meant to be druggish work. It's meant to be a joy. Like, that's what I'm getting at. Yeah, it
is. And we're stewards of this planet, of all of its resources, of all of its life, and we're going to manage it in such a way that everybody benefits. And if we can make our national parks more beautiful for the tourists, and more healthy for the wildlife that's there, where the lumber companies are actually making a good profit, and because we're taking good care of things, and we have the evidence of what it was like before we showed up. At a minimum, we should maintain the ecosystems in the way God gave it to us. But I actually see potential for us say, hey, we're created in the image of God. There are things that we should do in our creativity and in our intellect where we can actually make things better for everybody.
One of the things that I don't remember which book you've mentioned it, but just going back to what we perceive as what's going to be heaven, what's heaven going to be like? And we have a vision, a little bit of that in Revelation and in some of the other Bible passages. And we know in Rob actually wrote a book on Revelation that he hasn't shared with everybody yet, but it's really good. But it was looking at things like golden roads in Revelation and the idea of all these different jewels that were mentioned and that kind of thing. But one of the things that you've mentioned before is we'll still be working. We're not going to be eating bonbons all day, sitting up in the clouds, which is what some people perceive as heaven. What's your take on what heaven's going to be like?
Well, it's going to be a completely different realm, different laws of physics, even different dimensions. I think we're no longer will be constrained to linear time. God's going to release us into geometric time, which is going to make relationships with one another and our experience of love exponentially greater than anything we can imagine here. So it's like, I can't wait. It sounds like a wonderful place. And moreover, we're told that these wonderful conditions will be sustained for eternity. We look at the universe in which we're in right now, everything's temporary. Yeah, we're at the ideal moment in the history of the universe, but it's not going to be sustained. But this universe is simply a tool in God's hand to take us to a far better creation, but not until evil is eradicated once and for all. The universe in which we live is optimally designed for the eradication of evil and suffering. But when that has been achieved, the universe will have fulfilled its purpose. And God can take us into a new creation where we no longer need to be constrained by gravity and thermodynamics and electromagnetism and the four space-time dimensions. God is going to release us into a brand new realm. And yes, he's going to be creating there. And he says, whatever I create, you redeemed human beings are going to need to manage it, which is all the more reason that we need to manage well the resources of this earth. Because in the new creation, that's going to be our job. We're going to be managers and governors over God's new creation. We're being told that we will be teaching the angels. I mean, we get to experience the grace of God. The angels watch the grace of God. And so because we directly experience it, God says a time will come when I'm going to put you in positions where you'll be teaching, instructing, and ruling over the angels and everything else that I create. And so we're being prepared right now for a career. I mean, a class I'm teaching on Sundays, my paradoxes class, is the whole point that God is preparing us for a future career. And it's akin to going through really challenging graduate courses where we're being prepared for a career that's going to require all that challenging education. But a lot of people sign up for those graduate courses because of how much they value the career that it's going to prepare them for. And that's the message you see in the Bible. We should be meditating, those of us who are followers of Jesus Christ, on a daily basis. Spend a minute or a second or two focusing on what your role will be in the new creation, because that's going to motivate you all the more to take this life seriously, prepare and train, not only for your ministry here in this creation, but for the one that will follow.
And that's literally the start of Acts 1. Lord, is this the time you'll restore the kingdom of Israel? No, don't worry about that. Just you get busy, do what you need to do, because the Father is going to do what he needs to do, and he'll plan the timings. And I love what you put in Beyond the Cosmos, a little bit of a hint. You were sort of teasing it a bit, where the New Jerusalem is too big to be a cube from a physical context, right? And I was actually surprised to find out when I was looking into the very specialized Greek studies of Revelation, like Bible commentary stuff, that because of the change from a stadia to a cubit. So in other words, is the wall 1,300 miles high, or is the wall 250 feet high? And this has caused Bible scholars which is it? But I was reading a study by G.K. Beale where he says, hang on a second, what if it's both correct, and then geometrically it looks like a pyramid actually? And so in other words, it's a harking back to the Tower of Babel, because here you have man making their own city up to heaven, so to speak, whereas God's Tower of Babel, or God's tower, is instead coming down, and then we are then part of that, and then in that unified sense, what you just said, we get to work. We are pretty much the new reconstituted divine council, as Michael Heiser would say in his works. So yeah,
it's either a pyramid or a cube, but keep in mind, don't think of it as a pyramid or a cube in three dimensions of space, because we're going to have completely different dimensions. So I think of a 6-dimensional pyramid or cube, if you like, or whatever. It's going to be a mind blower. But my whole point when I wrote that is that you can't have such a structure in 3 space-time dimensions, 4 space-time dimensions, and the law of gravity. So it's evidence that the law of gravity won't be there. And we need the law of gravity now because it's crucial for the eradication of evil, just like thermodynamics is, just like electromagnetism is. There will be light in the new creation, but it's not going to be electromagnetic radiation. And everything's going to glow with light. There'll be no darkness. There'll be no shadows. So yeah, there's still going to be a lot of work for us physicists to do when we get into the new creation.
Yeah, that kind of does remind me of in the Bible, a lot of times they do distinguish light from dark, and it's always the children of the light, the people of the light, versus the times when the people are sinning the most tends to be when it's dark. And I think that that's just the idea that you just said, that it's always going to be light. I think that's kind of, we have such a hard time trying to think outside of our own dimensions and our own constraints and time. You know, atheists are all the time saying, I can't really understand how God can know what I'm going to do tomorrow. Can I? And I'm like, because he's concurrently in the past, present, future.
Yeah.
So,
but SJ, notice what I just mentioned a moment ago with respect to perception, where we were just speaking about mountains and how that thought doesn't go through our minds, like we don't think about a mountain as being beneficial, right? So I just love the way Hugh thinks, where he's like, okay, let's extend, say, that surface level perception. Now we're talking, this is physics now, like, you know, dimensionality. And so it's that same sort of, like, you know, you change the gears in your perception. And so Hugh, you're thinking more macroscopically as far as the universe is concerned, like you're taking the whole surface of the universe, you know, the 10-dimensional surface of this universe, and extending that out as kind of like a parable, and using that New Jerusalem as a sort of like a hint that in other words, we should not be surprised as Christians. We should not be surprised with what God can do because of His love for us. Sort of that heaven thing, like Paul says. Yeah.
I was teaching at a seminary a few years back, and the professors came up and said, "You got to tell me that there's golf courses in this New Jerusalem, and you got to tell me that there's ski slopes there." And I said, well, if the New Jerusalem is a cube, even if it's just 3 dimensions, there'd be enough space inside that New Jerusalem for every human redeemed being to have an apartment that would include a 10,000 foot high mountain with the greatest ski slopes you can imagine and 2 championship golf courses. Every one of us could have an apartment that includes all that. And so when it says no one can think or imagine how great and wonderful it will be, I said, that's just the New Jerusalem. Outside is a new earth. And outside of that is a new heavens. And, people talk about a bucket list. But, the bucket list we come up with is of exploring all the beautiful places here on the earth. You can take care of that in 100 or 200 years. But we're going to have all of eternity to take care of a limitless bucket list in the new creation.
The New Jerusalem can fit in the moon, right? Like if we took it from a 3-dimensional point of view, if you could literally shove it in the moon. So if anyone wants to know how big this thing is, well, just look at the moon. And
the idea is that you could actually have, without gravity, you could have floors. I mean, you can think of it as an apartment building where you've got 750 floors with a ceiling height is 10,000 feet for each level. And look at all the living space you got inside of there. And you can literally house billions of human beings in there, where every human being inside their living room would have 2 championship golf courses and a ski slope.
That's a good dig. I really need that ski slope because I'm getting worse as I get older at skiing. I want to go back to get better, so have a better body too.
Well, what kind of ski slopes do you have there in Florida?
I've had to travel. I've gone to Northern California, actually. I've skied in heavily before.
That's a good place, yes.
And Wyoming and Colorado and Europe, that's where I've skied. So. Well,
if you go to British Columbia, there's places where you can ski there, where you get a 10,000 foot vertical drop and a 40,000 foot run. If you're a really good skier, you might get 2 in a day, otherwise just 1. So, I mean, look at the planet we live on. It's just incredible.
Oh, it's beautiful. It's. I think that is that general revelation of God, and then we have the special revelation in Jesus, and it's just truly amazing. So we have so much to be thankful for. And even this idea that you're investigating, I want to say how much I appreciate how much work you've put into looking at the Goldilocks situation that we're in so many different ways.
Well, I'm now convinced in my latest book writing that every component of the universe, Earth, and Earth's life, and every historical event in the universe, Earth, and Earth's life plays some role in making possible the redemption of billions of human beings from their sin and evil. And I'm really going to hit that hard in the next book I'm bringing out on interior designs of our galaxy cluster, Earth, Sun, etc. And incidentally, people can get free chapters of my books, many of them anyway, at reasons.org/Ross. So they want to kind of get a free sneak peek, they can do that.
Awesome. So I don't know. I know we've gone over an hour, and I know we have an hour with you. I don't know if how much more time you have, or if you're willing to entertain a few more questions, or if we should just sort of, you might have something else going on.
Well, I'll take a few more questions. So go for it.
Yeah. Well, shall I ask?
Sure. Yeah, I'll let you go, Rob.
Okay. Well, just a quick comment to you. On your Facebook, about a month or two ago, you shared a NASA the dark side of the moon. They took a 4K 60 frames per second. So
Right.
I'm just a quick comment where now that this new book that's coming out, and I've been following your paradoxes class because you mentioned this book before. When I saw that video, it's just one of those, it just hits you like that existential angst of going, this thing has been here for 4.4 billion years. Like, because it's so clear, because it's so smooth, it's like it feels like you're flying over it. And then I sort of put myself in the shoes of, say, the astronauts that did go to the moon. And then that realization, oh my gosh, this solid body. For example, my folks, this is nothing against them, but usually a lot of our parents and folks are quite simple-minded. They just go by their days, not realizing that right now the moon is being a benefit to us while we live. So, it's just that realization. It's not just the moon, but it could be even the local group, right? Local group of galaxies, that they have to be where they are, and it's just incredible. Yeah.
Yeah, we're in a unique situation, and I got an article coming out at reasons.org on how you need the moon and the Earth to have exactly the history that they do in order to have life even possible. I mean, what we now know is that you have to have a coupled magnetosphere between the Earth and the moon. And you need the Earth and the moon close enough to one another in the first billion years of the history of the Earth-Moon system so that they can generate convective currents inside their iron liquid cores. And we don't need that now. The moon doesn't have a magnetic field. But in the first billion years of the history of the Earth-Moon system, the sun is pouring out this powerful radiation that if it wasn't for that coupled magnetosphere, we would have lost all of our water and all of our atmosphere. And so it basically makes a point that you're going to need an Earth-Moon system that forms exactly the way the Earth and the moon did form, with exactly the same history, with exactly the same magnetospheres. Otherwise, nothing happens. And all that was discovered just in the past few weeks. I mean, that's what's a thrill for me as a scientist, reading the scientific journals and literally on a daily basis, seeing published papers that basically add to the already overwhelming evidence that all this has been fine-tuned and designed to make possible our existence and our redemption by a creator beyond the universe.
Now, so to get to the question specifically, you speak about geoengineering ideas. One that I couldn't help but to just find it humorous, but rocket Earth. Explain that. Yeah,
I'm not a fan of geoengineering because I mean, one really popular idea is let's just put a whole bunch of aerosols in our atmosphere that will block out enough sunlight that'll compensate for all the carbon dioxide and methane and nitrous oxides we're emitting. The problem is that's very difficult to control. I mean, what if we discover, hey, we overdid it and we're cooling the planet and we're in a natural cooling cycle anyway, or we didn't put enough up there. So unless you got some kind of rheostat where you can control exactly how much blockage of sunlight there is, I think you're going to have unintended consequences. But yeah, I wanted to be complete. So I actually talked about this rocket Earth idea, which is basically making the point, okay, the sun's getting brighter and brighter. Within just a few million years, it's going to be too bright for us to survive here. But one way we can deal with that, just move the Earth farther away from the sun. So the sun's brighter, but if we're farther away, we'll be at the optimal temperature. But I did a calculation in the book just showing how much energy you have to expend to move the Earth to a more distant orbit. And bottom line is, that's not a technologically feasible solution to global warming. But I kind of put it in there just to give people an idea. Some of the extreme measures that people are thinking about, I mean, people are actually thinking about putting a solar screen between us and the sun, which would block out sunlight. But if it's there and you need to fix it, that's not going to be doable. And so again, unintended consequences, we're far better off making adjustments to what we're doing here in the surface of the Earth. So again, I put that in the book, just making the point, hey, these are some of the ideas that are being proposed. But there are ways that we could actually readjust our economy where actually all of us have greater economic well-being. And so why even pursue these outlandish ideas that are extremely expensive when we've got solutions that are available to us where we actually wind up not having to tax everybody to death, but actually lower their taxes.
And these ideas give Hollywood ideas to make these horror films, right?
Yeah. Well, in fact, I know some people in Hollywood, and they said, hey, thanks for putting that stuff in the book. This is actually giving me some script writing ideas.
It reminds me of Stephen King's Under the Dome, too. So a little bit of that. It was kind of a crazy idea where he's got this dome over this place and people went crazy in there. So,
or that movie Sunshine, where instead of the sun getting larger, the sun was actually shrinking. And so they had to go and ignite the sun or something. I don't know if you saw that one, a 2007 movie, sort of like a horror flick as well. But yeah, called Sunshine was the name. Yeah.
I do. I just one question that I just wanted to ask you, maybe as my last question was, you want to tell people how Genesis, or just kind of maybe, I know it's another book, but how you came to the Bible as being true rather than you had looked into the Quran and you looked into other books. And so I wanted to just ask you if you could share that with the audience.
Yeah, really quickly. I was born, raised, and educated in Canada. I got into astronomy when I was 7 and was very seriously pursuing it from the age of 8 onwards. And that led me to realize the universe has a beginning. If it has a beginning, there must be a beginner. I was not raised in a Christian home, but at age 16, I realized there must be a cosmic beginner. So I went about trying to find that cosmic beginner. I first looked for him in the writings of Immanuel Kant and René Descartes. I was quite disappointed by what I read in the Critique of Pure Reason, for example. And then I began to look at the world's holy books. And eventually I did pick up a Bible. And I went through it, I realized this is the only holy book of the religions of the world that gets all the history, geography, and science correct, and actually predicts future scientific discoveries. I was really blown away by 2 things. Number one, the Old Testament taught all the fundamental features of Big Bang cosmology, thousands of years before any astronomers had even an inkling that the universe had those characteristics. And number 2, when I looked at the creation texts, they had everything correctly stated and the correct chronological order. And I realized I was far beyond the scientific understanding of the Bible authors. And so that's what persuaded me. This book has to be inspired by the one that actually created the universe, the earth, and its life. And so as at age 19, I signed my name at the back of a Gideon Bible, giving my life to Jesus Christ.
Very good move. And I love that story. Absolutely love that story.
And people, I will say this to you. I'm a sort of like Calvinism and Arminianism. I hold to both. So it's the same thing. I am still convinced fully of concordism and also the ancient Near Eastern cosmology, that because God has to work with both people groups, right? So in other words, you have ancient Near Eastern cosmology that God is polemically, responding to, but people who are skeptical of the concordist approach, I'd like to say, look, aren't you ironically concordist when it comes to the prophecies of Jesus? Because you have, say, Isaiah 53 and Psalm 22 and all these, like, for example, Hosea 11, when Matthew says, out of Egypt I call my son. Well, Hosea is looking to in the past. He's not predicting some, but Matthew is concording. He's like, look at the pattern. Just as the Son of God, which is Jesus, has gone to Egypt and now he's coming out of Egypt, there's that patterning taking place. And I can't help but go, well, this is exactly, I think, how God wants to communicate ultimate truths to all people at all times. And hence, I think, to be more specific, you call it soft concordism, not hard concordism.
Well, I'm actually just recorded a lecture that will be given at the Evangelical Theological Society in November, where I defend concordism, the idea that God's given us both the book of nature and the book of scripture, and they concord with one another. But I also critique what I call hard concordism, which is the idea that every chapter in the Bible is a science textbook, and everything in the book of nature has theological implications. I do argue that there is overlap, that the overlap is significant, but I do agree that most of what's in the Bible is not science focused, but the creation texts definitely are. And those creation texts do perfectly concord with what we can see in the established book of nature. And so, but yeah, I agree. Concordism's gotten a bad name, mainly because I think there's been a lot of people who have taken it way beyond anything that the Bible ever encouraged.
Yeah, either way beyond, or the people that I've encountered, they then admit, no, we're not specialists in the science field. So we in other words, what you're saying is really impressive, but I don't want to trust it because I don't know the scientific details to make that judgment. And I'm saying, look, trust me, it's legit. So like when you, like a year ago, the recent findings of that rapid, so day 3, the landmass.
Right.
You showed the evolution of the chart. First, you thought it was just a flat line. Then maybe it's like a linear, then a slight exponential. And now it's just this sudden boom.
Right.
And it's just like, how else? And it's halfway in Earth's history as well, which again, in Genesis 1, it's still that halfway point. It's like, how do you explain that, kind of like what you just said, that overlap in that soft concordance point of view? This is the question for them is, yeah,
I think the reason concordism is getting a lot of pushback is you've got a lot of scientists out there with almost no theological training, and you've got a lot of theologians with almost no scientific training. Yeah. I mean, first time I met Gleason Archer, he told me, Hugh, I read your book on Genesis 1, and I came to the exact same conclusion. In fact, I had a paper that I wrote in 1955, basically agreeing 100% with everything that you wrote. But he says, I never submitted it for a journal publication. Why? Because I didn't know if the science would support what I had written, because he derived it all from just an analysis of the Hebrew. But that's an excellent example. Just looking at the Hebrew in Genesis, he came to the identical conclusion I came to coming from a scientific perspective. But also basically makes the point, we scientists need to be engaging theologians. And in fact, I remember one time I was at the University of California, Berkeley, and there was a meeting set up where they had a dozen physicists on one side of the table and a dozen theologians on the other side of the table, and they were terrified of one another. And one, I mean, I'm a pastor, so I've been doing theological studies and teaching at seminaries. I was the only one that had a foot in both camps, but it took a half hour to get these physicists and theologians to actually talk to one another. But once it got started, you couldn't stop them.
But surely Robert Jastro's, that famous quote, the physicists are climbing up the mountain and they see theologians at the top. Yeah, surely that's lurking around in that room. Yeah.
It's so funny. I just thought of that exact same quote when he was talking. I was picturing him getting to the top of the mountain of knowledge, and there the theologians sit. It's so funny. Well, listen, I want to say thank you so much for coming on here today, Dr. Ross. I want everybody, please go out if you haven't done it yet. If you haven't bought this book and read it, go out and read it. If it's not, just for a few of these really interesting comments of how all of this does come back to God. And so I wanted to see if you two both want to close out with maybe where people can find you. I actually listed all of the stuff in the description for links to where they can find you. But if you want to mention anything else, what you're working on or anything like that.
Sure. Well, I mean, our website is reasons.org. Again, free chapters of my books at reasons.org/Ross. And as Rob has mentioned I have a Facebook and Twitter page. It's for ministry purposes only, but I do take questions on both Facebook and Twitter. So if people think of questions, they're welcome to engage me there. And incidentally, they can engage all our scholars. So if you got questions for Fuzz Rana, our staff biochemist, you can post those on his Facebook and Twitter page, and likewise with the rest of our team. So thank you for this opportunity. It was really, you guys asked great questions, so thank you.
Oh, thank you. I also want to just point out, here's a book by Fuzz Rana. I've interviewed him on this channel before, and then Ken Samples. So we've got some other reasons to believe books out there. So you guys go out and buy all of these books. And so thank you so much. And Rob, did you want to?
No, that's really it. I'm looking forward to your next book, Hugh. And what I'm noticing is the pattern of your approach here is you start out very like, here's like the model, the whole like what's the book? So yeah, you had a book of 2005 about creationist science, and the other one
More Than a Theory.
More Than a Theory. So so now what I'm noticing is, okay, now they've got all that out of the road. Let's just now pump the brakes and focus on specialized one topic at a time.
Right.
And that's what I'm noticing, this build up. So you've done now a book, say why the universe is the way it is. Then now Improbable Planet. Obviously, Who Was Adam? That's a very specialized, like, human anthropology thing. Now this climate change book. This is something I'm just like, so this is an encouragement to people out there. I would read Hugh's works chronologically to see this build up. And every time you go to a new book, to maintain that memory of what you just read, because Hugh's staying cutting edge with the scientific materials, and it's not what Hugh is doing is you're synthesizing what's the best in science and how it gives a positive case for the gospel at the end of the day, and I think that's very important.
Yeah, I like that too. And I just want to say, there's tons and tons of references. All these pages are references, so very well researched. So thank you so much for coming on, everybody. Please like, subscribe, and do come again. And I have a little saying that I want to say, whether you eat, drink, or whatever you do it all for the glory of God. So,
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you. You guys have a great one. I'm going to go ahead and end the broadcast.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.